Alright, you crazy cats and kittens, let's finish up the third part of this animated sequence where we're having the guy take a bite, chew, and then finally on this one you can tell on our rough animation he's going to do a big swallow and then end with his eyes opening up. And just like we've done with the other ones, we need to create another head sequence that animates that part into there. In order to do this, let's go to our timeline, and I've turned on my rough animation, and then we need to go to the keyframes where it does the movement. So in our case, he's actually going to go from frame 68, this frame here, to frame 74, where he chews down and his head lifts up, and then finally he's going to end on frame 81, the same place he would be on the very first frame. So going back to frame number 68, let's add a keyframe by selecting that frame on our head layer, hit F6, then let's move into frame number 74 and hit another keyframe, so F6 there. And with that done, let's move our head up and into position to make sure we unlock it first. So there it is there. And then finally, you can see it's going to be moving back down into position for that one as well. But we're not going to add a keyframe just yet. What I'm more interested in is making sure it goes from here. So let's add our classic tween. And as it moves, you can see he's going to swallow going up and then go back down, back into position. What we need to do is let's select this 74th frame. So this frame right here, and this is where we're going to start our new sequence. With that frame selected, control click or two-finger click on here. Let's scroll down and duplicate our symbol again. With this one, we can call this one our swallowing. We'll say OK. Notice that this will create a new one, and now when we double click on it, this will go into this position. What we want to do is in our sequence, we want to have all of the frames that he's beginning on, in this case the one where he's chewing, end on the sequence where he has his eyes open and his mouth stretched out. So with this, let's go up to our keyframe. We need to keep all of the frames that are in this first frame here and delete away everything else. So I'm going to click on my second frame, hold down Shift, and click on the very bottom frame so it gets everything in all these columns but doesn't get anything in that first column. Then I can press Shift F5 and delete everything away and keep that first column. Now I need to go in and copy in our final frame positioning for all of our parts, but I need to paste it exactly in the same number of frames that are necessary to finish out the swallow sequence. So I'm going to return to scene 1. Let's go up to our timeline. Notice this frame sequence starts on frame 74 and should end at frame 81. This means there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 frames total to reach this position. Keep that number in mind. So 8 frames is what we need from frame 1, 2 through frame 8. Let's go to our very first frame. And so this is our head position here. With that first frame selected, double click on the head. And let's select all of the keyframes in this first position. So clicking on the first frame here, hold down Shift, and get the last frame. All of those are now selected. We can control or two-finger click. And let's do copy frames. So we'll get everything from there. Jump back into scene 1. Finally, let's go back over to frame number 74. With that selected, double click on it. And remember, we want to be on the 8th frame. So put your cursor right on the 8th frame, 5, 6, 7, 8, right here. Hold down Shift and click down to the very bottom. And with all of those selected, we can control or two-finger click. And let's do paste and overwrite frames. That will paste those frames into there. Now when it moves, you can see how it's going to open up the eyes, and boy, it does look a little bit scary. That's simply because we need to add the appropriate frame effects for each one. For instance, we need to have the eyes opening, we need to have the pupils aligning, and fixing everything. But before we do that, let's turn off all of our tweens that we've created. So go here and remove all of the different tweens by clicking on it and removing the shape tween and removing any of the other motion tweens. Create classic tweens. Oops, excuse me, not cut. Remove those. And also remember, some of these aren't going to be tweened at all. They need to be frame by frame done. And so with each one of those, we'll take it one step at a time. First, let's go up and do the nose. Even though we've just removed it, with that done, let's do a classic tween and have the nose morph back into shape from there. That will look good. The right eyebrow should go from there to up. And remember, with that eyebrow, it's going to be a shape tween. And we can do the same thing for the left eyebrow and do a shape tween with that. So those will move up into position. Now the left and right pupil are something that's interesting. And remember, we got rid of the left pupil here, but then we had to add it on once the eye starts opening up. So I'm going to go and not use the left and right pupil. Instead, we're going to do the left and right eye first. Then we'll come back and add the pupil as necessary. So skip down to the right eye. And remember, the eye is going from a closed position to an open. And we can't just add a shape tween here. This is what's actually creating that really freaky eye kind of look. So we're going to undo that. Instead, we want to start off with our eye slightly opened, but opening more to get into position. So I'm going to select this 8th frame, and I'm going to copy it. So choose Copy Frame. There we go. Jump back into the 2nd frame, and we'll add a new one, F6. We'll delete away this position here, this closed eye. And with that done, we'll control click, and then we'll paste and overwrite the frames and add it to here. Now with that done, we can move our eye into position. And to know exactly where it's at, we can turn on our onion skin just to make sure it's in the right spot. So I want to kind of nudge it up and over. And that looks pretty good, right about there. With that done, we can turn on or select our free transform. Hold down Option as I click and drag from the very bottom, and then drag it down from here. Now that we have our 2nd frame done, we can create our classic tween, our shape tween, hit cancel, our shape tween between those two. And this will have the eye opening up. We'll turn off our onion skin. Now the eye is opening up as it moves in as well. Let's do the same thing for the left eye. So selecting this, we're going to click on the 8th frame. We're going to 2-finger click on it and copy the frame. Create a new keyframe at frame number 2 on this layer, F6, and we can delete away our eyelid. Then we can control click or 2-finger click on that, and we'll paste and overwrite that frame, putting the eyeball right where it needs to be. Turn on your onion skin. I'm going to use my move tool to move it into place so that I can see exactly where that eyeball is. Use my arrow keys to nudge it. Grab your transform tool and hold down Option as you drag downward. That looks good. And then finally we can go up to our timeline and create our shape tween between that motion. Now when I turn off my onion skin, you can see the eyes are going to open back up. Now let's add in the pupils so that they also stay nice and aligned where they're at. Again, choose our right pupil. This will be on frame number 8. We will copy the frame, select frame number 2. Remember, frame number 2 is actually where the eyeball starts to open up. And so with that, we will control click and paste and overwrite. Now you can see that frame has been added there. All we need to do now is use our move tool. Let's move it into place. I'm going to nudge it up just a bit, put it into the center. And since it's a little bit big, You may have to zoom in for this. I'm going to choose my transform tool, click on the top, and let's scale it down so that it fits nicely inside of there. That looks good. Now when I go back to my timeline, we'll create a shape tween between that. Now the pupil will open and follow it as well. Let's do the same for the left pupil. Select the 8th frame on the left pupil, Control click, and we'll copy the frames. Select that 2nd frame, Control click, and paste the frames. And remember, it's not going to be in the right spot, so with that 2nd frame selected, we'll go to here and choose your Move tool. You can nudge it into place. And if need be, you can choose your Transform tool and hold down Option and scale it down just a bit to go from there. Now we can return to our timeline and create a shape tween. And you can see now my eyes are going to go from a closed back to an open position. Now let's get down to the bottom and do our left and right ears. For these, it should be easy enough to select the 1st frame and do a classic tween for the left ear. Let's do the same thing for the right ear. When I test those out, those ears should be moving into place. That looks good. And as far as the top of the head goes, we can create a classic tween for it and have it also morph along with it. Finally, we can do the left and right cheek lines. I'm going to turn off visibility for my mouth, the patch, and even my lower jaw, just so we can focus in on those little cheeks that were created. With this, we'll do the left cheek first, create our little shape tween. And remember, for this one, it's going to morph down from one position to the other. As long as it stays there, that's okay. Let's do the same for our right cheek line, creating a shape tween for that, and have it move into position for here, down into there. That's what we want to be able to use for our mouth as it moves. So the next thing I would recommend doing is the mouth position. Let's turn on visibility for it. Let's see what the mouth looks like as it goes from a stretched out to there. For this, we'll create a shape tween for the mouth. And you can see the mouth actually, for mine, works out pretty good, especially since it's just a line. If you need to, or if the mouth is giving you difficulty, you can use your regular paint brush tool, the one with the squiggly line, and redraw the starting and stopping point of the mouth till you get it to shape tween appropriately. From here, the next thing we can focus on is doing the jaw, going from the open position to the closed position. To keep things simple, I'm going to turn off visibility for every layer except for my mouth, which I want to be able to see, my cheek lines for left and right, and also, of course, my jaw, so I can see it. Now we're going to primarily be working on the jaw layer, so make sure it's unlocked. And we want to move from this first position down to here. So I'm going to choose my 1st frame and turn on my onion skinning, and then drag out so I can see at least 1 frame ahead. What we want to do is to move increment by increment from this position down into this position, one little bit at a time. Now, since we have 8 full frames, or actually, 6 frames in between here, I want to make sure these are nice and evenly spaced. So to draw this off, I'm going to select my 4th frame, the one that's right in the middle, and I'm going to insert a keyframe here. And then I'll draw all of my frames before and after this frame. This will make it a little bit easier to pace everything out. So with my 4th frame selected, I'm going to delete away my mouth, hit delete. And now you can see all I've got to do is draw the shapes in between the 2 shapes that we have. Do make sure you've got your onion skinning showing both of those on either side. So with that 4th frame selected and everything deleted away, let's go to our toolbox and choose our regular paintbrush tool, our brush tool, the one without the squiggly line. We'll go to our properties panel, set your fill color to black, and make sure your stroke size or brush size is set to 5. Then going into our panel, we need to do the shape that's in between both of these. So it's not quite here, not quite here. But I can also look at my mouth position and get a good idea of the shape that it needs to be. So somewhere in between here. As it comes down, there's my mouth, so I need to envelop it. And then back around under the nose. With that done, I can grab my paint bucket tool, set my fill color. And this is where maybe I can turn on my head or something that will show the skin tone that I have. That done, grab my paint bucket tool, get my fill color. Let's select that skin tone, and I can fill in on the inside of that. That looks pretty good. With that, let's go up to our timeline. Let's do the frame that's before this one. F6 to add another keyframe. Delete it away. Now I need to just work backwards from here. So adjust my onion skin and go in. I can paint somewhere in between this green and this purple one. Grab my brush tool, set my fill color to black, go back in. Let's paint this one. And making sure it's in between. Yeah, I don't like that one. Let's do another one. That looks much better. And remember, these are only going to last one little frame, so it's going to go by real quick if you mess up. Swap over to our fill bucket tool, change your fill color to that skin tone, and fill it in. Return to your keyframe. Let's do this second keyframe, F6. Now you could do this just straight ahead, one frame at a time. The downside is I wouldn't want you to reach all the way to the end and be off by a little bit. So that's why I'm backing up and doing it this way. With the second frame selected, we'll delete that. Grab my paintbrush tool, set my fill color to black, and finally let's do in between both of these. Again, go around my jaw, back down to here, going in between both of those, and then back up to here. Great. Grab your paint bucket tool, set your fill color to skin tone, and then fill that one in. Now, especially if I turn off, you can see it's starting to transition into there. Now let's move forward for the next half, filling in each one of those. Select the next keyframe. This will be keyframe number 5. Hit F6. You can delete it away. Turn on our onion skin. And make sure we can only see the frame before and the next frame after. In this case, all the way to the end. So now I need to paint between these two frames, but still filling in that area. So grab my paintbrush tool, set my fill color to black. Black selected, I can go in between both of these. Oops. Off by a little bit. Let's try again. Main thing is I want to make sure I can get my mouth all the way circled in. Great. Grab my paintbrush or paint bucket, select my skin tone, and fill it in. Go back up to our keyframe, insert one there, delete it away, grab your paintbrush, set your fill color to black, in between both of these, around the home stretch. All the way around and down. And it's going to start to look wonky, I know. Go back up, paint bucket. Paint bucket gets up the skin tone, fills that in. Next to last one, this one should be almost perfect. Again, choose that 7th keyframe, hit F6, delete it away, grab your paintbrush, change your fill color to black, then finally, let's get in between these two. Select them, almost there, pretty much one on top of the other. Got it filled in. Paint bucket, pick pick up that skin tone and fill it in. With all of that done, let's test it out. Turn off our onion skin. Now you can see how it goes back down to normal. The final thing obviously we need to do is the patch that's in between his face. If we turn on visibility for the patch and go back to our first layer, you can see that it does start off good. Let's turn on our shape tween. Let's see if it stays in position. Not too bad. There's really only a couple of places where you can see it's actually getting off by just a little bit. So if that's the case, I've turned on my shape tween. We'll nudge it forward. I can see it's off by this particular frame. So in my case, the third frame is where it's off. So I've selected that third frame, hit F6 and insert a keyframe, and I can select the patch. Actually, I'm going to turn off or lock down everything else. Got to unlock my patch. There we go. Grab our transform, make it a little bit bigger to cover up that particular part. Or use my arrow keys and nudge it down just a bit. That looks good. Now we can move forward. You can see it's off by just a little bit, so maybe here I'll add one more keyframe and nudge it down just a smidge more. And move forward until it gets all of it. Now it's back into position where it needs to be. Down to there. Let's turn on visibility for everything. It goes back to a resting position. At this point, I can look at it and see if there's anything else that needs to be corrected. I think it's actually moving pretty good. So we can go back to scene 1 and we can test this out. It goes from here back down to its original position. Now, obviously we need to affect some of the timing for it. So it goes up and then swaps back down. Now, see, here's the problem. At this point, it should have my fully smiled out, squashed down face, but you can see when I returned here, it's actually on a different frame. Well, here's what's going on. I'm going to turn off my rough animation. Remember, right here, we created a new frame. And so as I play forward from here, it's going to jump to play with this. What's going on is when I select this frame, if I actually click on the symbol itself, you'll notice in the properties panel, you can tell where it's going to start playing from, what the first frame it's going to loop through. Now yours may say 8 or it may say 12 or some other different frame. But what it needs to start playing on is the first very number 1 frame. So set that to be your first frame. Again, make sure that frame is selected so that when it moves up, it moves into position, and when it reaches this frame, when you click on this symbol, properties panel, you've got the first frame to play is the very first frame for this symbol. Now when it plays down, it goes back to its original position. The final thing we need to do, turn on my rough animation, is it needs to move back into its original position. So to do this, let's go to our frame, insert one more keyframe at the very end. Let's drag this guy down back to his starting point right here. And then of course from here we need to create our classic tween so that it moves from here back into position. Let's test them out. Command return, chew, 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 swallow and down, chew, 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 and down. Excellent job. The final thing you need to do to turn in this exercise is to save it up. So we'll go to File and let's do a Save As. Whoops, not Save Template. File, Save As. Label this Part 3. So instead of Part 2, make sure it's an Animate document. And this Part 3 is what you're going to turn in to the Moodle page.